Johnson's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. I know this is a difficult subject area. Prior to my election to Congress, I was a constitutional law attorney, and I litigated free speech cases in the courts for almost 20 years, defending religious liberty and the First Amendment. And so I'm very wary of censorship efforts. Sometimes they're well-intended, but there's always a high degree of subjectivity, and it causes problems. And I'm still trying to understand what standards each of your organizations utilize to determine exactly how offensive or controversial or fake content is defined. And as you've noticed, many of us have come in and out of the hearing because we have other things going on. If you've answered some of these, I apologize in advance. But this is a question that I think my constituents back home really want to know, because they ask me this all the time. How do each of your companies define fake news? Let me start with Ms. Bickert.
Thank you, Congressman. First, I want to say that we actually published a new version of our standards in April that gives all of the detail of what we tell our content reviewers in terms of how to apply our policies against things like hate speech or bullying and so forth. We also include in there a section on what we're doing to combat false news. It is not against our policies, meaning we don't remove the content just for being false. What we do instead is we try to provide, if we have an indication that a news story is false, and that would be because it's been flagged as potentially being false, and then we've sent it to third-party fact checkers who have rated it false, then we will provide additional information to people who see that content. And that will be related articles from around the internet. We will also try to counter any virality of that post by reducing its distribution.
Okay. Ms. Downs.
Our goal is to provide our users with trustworthy information that's responsive to what they're looking for.
So how do you define fake news?
Fake news is obviously a term used to describe a spectrum of content. So at one end of the spectrum, you have malicious, deceptive content that's often being spread by troll farms, et cetera. That content would violate our policies, and we would act quickly to remove the content and or the accounts that are spreading it. In the middle, you have misinformation that may be low quality. This is where our algorithms kick in to promote more authoritative content and demote lower quality content. And then, of course, you even hear the term used to refer to mainstream media, in which case we do nothing. We don't embrace the term in that context.
Let me ask you before I move to Twitter. If a content reviewer determines that something is fake news, is there an appeals process for the person who produced that content? I mean, are they notified formally?
Anytime we remove content for violation of our policies, the user is notified and given a link to an appeals form.
How long does the appeals process take?
I'm not familiar with the average turnaround times, but I could get back to you with that information.
Well, I wish you would. I mean, the news cycle obviously is constantly changing. So if the appeals process takes days or weeks, then it's a moot point by the end of that process. And our concern is, of course, that any organization, any company, would filter things that they may or may not, or their internal reviewers may not agree with, and then by the time the appeals process is exhausted, it's stale content anyway, and if the objective was to pull it down and take it out of the public's view, then that was accomplished just because of the time delay. So there's a due process concern that we have, even though you're not the government. I mean, it still should apply here, I think. Let me ask you, I'm getting to Twitter next, but hold on. Are individuals outside of your company consulted with regard to appropriate content or the purveyors of the content?
Our policies are developed by us, but we sometimes consult experts when we feel we need additional expertise to understand particular kinds of content. However, all enforcement decisions are made internally by the company.
A controversy developed this year with regard to you guys about the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, and they labeled some mainstream Christian and conservative organizations as hate groups because they didn't like what they were doing. And then Google and YouTube used the SPLC designation, at least allegedly, to flag the content of those groups. I mean, did that happen? Do you admit that that happened?
So that reference is to a program that we call the Trusted Flagger Program, which is one where we engage NGOs and government agencies with expertise on the particular kinds of things we prohibit per policy. They get access to a bulk flagging tool so they can flag videos to us in bulk rather than one at a time. They do not have any authority to remove content, restrict content, or demote content on our services. All of those decisions are made by us. So we're leveraging their expertise, but decision-making authority is retained by the company.
I guess this goes to the appeals process, but I mean, some of these groups I know personally are legitimate, well-respected, faith-based organizations, and I just want to say SPLC is not a neutral watchdog organization, so I'm glad to know they don't get editorial control, but I think some of that needs to be looked at. I got 2 seconds. I didn't get to Twitter, but I appreciate you all being here. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.